And greetings and welcome to the QCast. This is season 4, episode 10. Not a single real countable game of hoops. And this is already episode 10. Very exciting stuff. Guys, up until now, 4 seasons, the QCast, I feel like, has really been a random guy interviewing random people. This today is the start of the QCast being like real journalism because we have a new segment and it's called In the Room. And what In the Room is basically is we're going to take you behind the scenes of the workings of the men's basketball national committee with 3 people who were just there a year ago, less than a year ago. Let me introduce this esteemed panel that's going to be part of QCast segment In the Room all season long. We will have many episodes where we just break this thing down from every angle. First of all, let's go to Maryville College, where I'll introduce the former chair of the men's basketball committee, Sara Quatrocky. Sara, how are you doing today?
You know what, Bob? It is so great to be back. This was just a dream, in March when we were all just, brainstorming together, and here we are. I mean, look at us. We are just launching.
You look more relaxed since we were doing these interviews and we were talking about reels. Like, you look much more relaxed. Let's also go to Reading, Pennsylvania, where Rick Ferry is preparing for season 23 at the helm of the Lions, the head men's basketball coach of Albright. Rick, how are you doing? Are you ready to roll here on In the Room?
Well, I already have one problem, Bob.
Yes.
Okay, you used the word esteemed.
Well, I think you are.
And
I feel like you're.
I don't know if everyone's going to agree with that, but no, we're excited to be here. The 3 of us have been talking about it for a while. I think it's something really exciting for Division III basketball, and let people know some of the inner workings of what goes on.
This should be a lot of fun. We appreciate
Bob. What you should have did was tell everybody that Rick was 23 years at the helm, but I think he spent 22 years on the committee as well.
Yeah,
might be the longest tenured RAC and committee member in the history of the NCAA.
I looked up the championship manual. They didn't keep those records, but I have heard, Rick, that could possibly be a thing.
I got it right up here.
Yeah, it's on microfiche in the national office somewhere.
Yeah.
Now we have sun shining in Reading, Pennsylvania, up there with Rick. Where I think it's still very dark is in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And folks, as a fellow CCIW fan that's often recruiting competition with Kenosha, Wisconsin, I have to tell you that I've never seen Lake Michigan look like the Caribbean. I just have to say that.
Yeah.
But that's what we're presenting here today. So Ryan Kane, you have changed jobs since we last met in Fort Wayne, Indiana. You are now the athletic director of Carthage College. How are you doing, Ryan? Are you excited to be part of the QCast here?
I'm excited to be here. This is great. It's a nice, bright day here in Kenosha, Wisconsin, as we are getting closer to daylight savings time. So let that seasonal depression start to sink in, and let hoops bring that light to your life that you need.
That is exactly right. And some good basketball going to be played in Kenosha this year, of course. So, again, for the viewers, what we want to do with this is we have these 3 committee members from last season, including the chair. They were knee deep into this stuff. They led the way along with their peers, and they are no longer on the committee. And the second they were officially off the committee, we signed a deal. We signed a contract for this In the Room concept. And Sara, let me just start with you at this point here. First of all, are you relieved to not be dealing with all that heavy stuff anymore? Are you sad that that's over? Or I just thought I'd start with you first.
I'm not quite sure if relieves the word, Bob. There is a little letdown after all is said and done, because as you can see, I hope you see, the 3 of us are like pretty good friends. And so that's one of the things that you get on the committee is you spend so much time together, and get ridiculed together, have a lot of highs together, have a lot of lows together, but we spend a lot of time together, on phone calls, Zooms. We give up valuable time of our lives to spend together. And so like when it's all over, we're like, are we going to see each other again? Are we going to do things together again? But like, at least the 3 of us, I know obviously we all have real jobs as well. We're all athletic directors. And so the three of us at least have been keeping together a nice, it actually would probably be a Netflix movie someday if someone wants to buy it. It's like a chain of texts like, hey, when this happens, what do you do? It's been kind of fun just to see the three of us like just kind of go from basketball committee to just our real jobs. And that's how we keep in contact. And so coming back to do this together, it's going to be pretty fun. And I think we'll be bonded, for life now. We've made pretty good friendships with a lot of people, not just these two guys, but that's the part that kind of sucks when you're done. But when you're in it, it is a lot of work because we all do have jobs. It's a volunteer job.
Right.
And we give up a lot to be on that committee.
And Rick, one of the people that you worked with last year that's still there, and he's now the lead guy, is Luke Flakertzy. And talk a little bit about, Rick, about like the role that Luke is coming into as the chair at this point. When you're a head coach or you're an athletic director or whatever, and you're also trying to do this role where you're the chair, Rick, I mean, or you're part of the committee in general, pretty tough to balance all that, isn't it? Like, how did you balance the two duties in all those years that you were part of the committee?
Well, it's an incredible challenge. And the biggest issue is when it really hits is when you're the busiest. So as a coach, down the stretch of the season, when everything's magnified, that's when the committee work really ramps up.
Right.
And so the time you really can least afford to spare time is when you have to give time. And so you just find that something has to give. I found that my Sundays gave way, so all of a sudden I'm watching film on Sundays, which is something that I would, be doing on Monday, Tuesday, but we probably have, 4 or 5 hours of committee work that goes by the wayside, so again, like I said, something has to give. So that's just, you
Right.
find a way to get the job done. Luke's going to have his hands full. It's a lot. It's a balancing act. He's got multiple new committee members this year. So, he's really going to, he's going to work for it, and he's clearly, he's up to the task, but it's going to take a lot of time.
And Ryan, question for you. First of all, I have two questions for you. Is there any guilt associated with someone that was on the real committee, now part of a podcast, kind of just taking pot shots at people potentially? I mean, is there any guilt going from real committee?
He's not going to have guilt.
Yeah. Is there any guilt? Do you feel bad for Luke, like that you're doing
the
this?
wrong person to ask.
Yeah, I'd like to ask. That's why I'm asking that question. Ryan, what say you on that?
Yeah, not a single ounce. No,
That's why you're here. That's great.
Exactly.
That's
great. It's like, what you signed up for. Our other AD folks here, it's like, well, you know what? Athletic trainers, you guys work nights and weekends. It's a tough gig. You know what you signed up for. You know what? Like, course information, you know what you signed up for. I mean, I don't know if I have a ton of sympathy for you. It's like a doctor, you're going to see some blood. I don't know. I guess that's just part of the gig. You signed up for it. So it's not like you go into this completely blind. You don't know what you're getting. This ain't a house of horrors here. I mean, you know what's coming.
I like it. And my second question, I was thinking of doing a segment on this show somewhere along the way called Mean Tweets, where I pull out some tweets that came the committee's way last year. Like, I've got an assortment of mean things that people said about the committee last year. Ryan, would you be in favor of me introducing that somewhere maybe in January? Is that okay?
100%, because it's all, like, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So, like, it's all in how you take it. I mean, you might think it's mean. We might think it's hilarious.
Yeah. I mean, we had great joy in some of the things that were tweeted last year. I mean, I can't.
Or the phone calls.
Phone calls.
Or the phone calls.
The phone calls, the tweets, the texts, the emails. I mean, because people that have no idea, that live in God knows where, are like sending in these things, and they're like, I don't know. It's so hilarious. because they think that we're just like deliberately doing something to ruin their life. And it's just so crazy. But like we loved the mean tweets. So if you have any saved up from last year, we would love it, because I mean we could probably go back and find some. But
Yeah, I've
I'm
got
sure, I'm sure we could just go in Sarah's Twitter feed and we'd find
yeah,
one.
we
Yes.
could just go to my
We,
to my mentions and my I've got a
Oh yeah.
lot.
No, I've got
we
some.
need
I
a
do.
sponsor.
I just
We
wanted to
need a
make sure that
sponsor though.
wanted to
Yeah,
make
we,
sure
real
we
quick.
should get a
Yeah.
sponsor.
I
Yeah.
just wanted to make sure it was cool and that we're, you know, we're in the trust tree here.
I
and
mean,
in the way.
honestly, I mean, this is like hoops real. Hoops real. This is like keeping it real
I
in
agree.
D3. Keeping it
Hoops
real in D3.
Maybe that could
D3
be a
hoops right here.
hashtag. That could be a new hat. Hoops real for
Hoops
this
real right
program.
here.
So let
Yeah.
me ask you, Sarah, a serious question.
Yeah.
Well, as serious as in the room is going to be, that is so last year, when you look back on what you guys did in terms of the whole thing, you know, just the whole process, the way it played out, your selections, your brackets, your regional rankings, overall, do you feel great about the championship that was the 22-23 season that culminated in Christopher Newport and basically a buzzer beater? Do you feel great about what happened last year, or any like certain things like, oh, I wish we would have done this differently? How do you look back on last year?
Yeah, I think and Rick can attest to this. I mean, because we were on my entire 4 years I served with Rick. I mean, from where we were 4 years ago to having to literally pull teams off a plane during COVID. I mean, I was, you know, that first weekend of that tournament, I was at Emory having to deal with like the presidential visit to the CDC. I mean, I look back at that, some wild times. We had committee members going to Hopkins for, you know, like first line. I mean, they were like, you know, we laugh and say they were like, you know, on the first line of duty of COVID. They were like literally, like that was like before we even knew what COVID was, right? So like what the kind of tournament that we had last year, are you kidding me?
Yeah, pretty incredible.
We had that entire bracket was just game after game coming down to, you know, last possessions, final minutes, and we had the best teams in there. And you know, the bracket was great. Each pod that we had even had, you know, in the early rounds of the tournament had great games. And we just put a new spin on the tournament kind of every year. Whether it was, you know, how we were bracketing or, you know, a little bit of innovation here or there. And you know, we have limitations in Division III and everybody can complain and whine about them, but we did as much as we could to try to overcome those with the resources that we had. And at the end of the day, the best team won last year.
Yep, they did.
And they won in dramatic fashion and was an ESPN top 10 play, and everybody in the country got to see it. Like, what does anybody have to complain about? I didn't get any mean tweets that day.
You should know. As we look back on it, I mean, what an incredible to go from Christopher Newport winning it. And I remember sitting at Mary Hardin Baylor scores table the first weekend, and Farmingdale State almost beat them. So like you had this incredible from round 1 to 6. It was incredible. The games were great. Ryan, Mike Shower used to say that the criteria is actually so clear that if you're paying attention, you can get a whole bunch of the pool C's right. I mean, I got 19 out of 20 again. My dream is 20 out of 20. It's never happened. But it is pretty like some people don't pay attention and then take pot shots. But if you pay attention, it's actually fairly clear to follow along. Do you see that from your role, having been on the committee and now being off it, that it's actually, you know, it's not black and white, but it's pretty close?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you there. It's pretty close. You know, I had the fortune of being on the rack when Mike was the rack chair for Region 8, I believe, when I was head coach at Ripon. And I learned quickly in kind of working with him, the way he handled those rack calls was it changed my perception as someone who was coming out of it, you know, completely new, looking at all the data on the NCAA site, to then being a rack chair when Mike was the chair, you know, not this past year, but the year prior, and handling those calls and really educating my rack on that. You know, this past year, our rack was green, you know, accomplished coaches, trust me, you know, guys that have won national championships. And so they were also very unclear. But towards the end, it got to the point where they were almost like, wow, like this is pretty much right here. Like there is no room for like, oh, well, the eye test. And you hear that all the time, whether you're watching the Division I committee talk towards the end of the year or not. And even the Division I, right? It's got to the point now where you got these quad wins. And I mean, it's pretty laid out for you. You're going to know where you're at. You know, Joel and Artie can tell you today. So it's kind of where I think we got to at some point. But yeah, no, to Rick's point, the real work does start at that point of the year. But you know, what's funny is like when we get into that and when we're in the room, hashtag in the room,
hoops real.
The last few teams, it's heavy, you know. I mean, that's where it gets really, really close. But up until that point, it's pretty clear cut.
And just one more question about last year, Rick. The bracketing is often an area where some of the mean tweets emanate from, is what I'll say. People don't quite understand some of the realities of budgeting, and that there isn't this unlimited budget to fly people wherever you want, whenever you want. So you end up with like the Texas pod last year, which I think you guys would all agree, like seating wise, those teams all shouldn't have been playing each other down in Texas, but it kind of like some of that is what it is. You're going to have some of that. Do you find, Rick, that the bracketing part of it ends up one of the biggest challenges due to the constraints and flights and everything like that? Or what's your thought on bracketing?
I mean, I don't know that it's one of the biggest challenges because, you know, our hands are tied a little bit, you know, and so yeah, it's a perceived challenge because you want to get as balanced a bracket as possible, and you can only do so much with Texas, with California, with Washington.
Right.
You know, there's only so many schools, and we can only do so many flights, and so you know that means we can only do so much. So instead of, you know, yeah, they're going to be upset about that. In that case, the Texas bracket last year, but I think instead you have to look at it. Well, how many different regions are represented in each of the pods?
Yeah,
and you know, we're doing everything in our power to get as national a tournament as possible, working within the financial constraints that Division III athletics has in place.
Yeah, and I always say, if anyone that follows Division II at all, and it's a completely regional tournament. It's a completely, so they have their Elite Eight all go to one place, and the 8 teams that go are from the eight regions. They just play it off in regions, which is what we were doing like 25 years ago. So we really have a national tournament. And there's some weird things that happen with the bracket, especially depends on what happens in the conference tournaments. You know, like I think was it Cal Lutheran that ended up winning the SCIAC. That sort of changed the ability to do some stuff with Texas and California. So I just wanted to go into bracketing. So just to kind of give Luke Flakertzi's crew a little bit of headway here, that like, yes, there's challenges in bracketing, and we could just throw that on the table now. Ask you guys the same question here. Let's just go around there. And I'm interested, this is the kind of intent of the show, is we're here, we're recording this on Halloween. So October 31st. And my question for all of you is kind of like, what is the committee doing now? What is the committee doing today? And or this week or the next week? Like, tell us, like, this is where we get inside the room and we start breaking this down. I'm going to start with Sara. I'm going to ask you, Sara, kind of like what exactly is happening now, and then might ask everyone some spins on like what are the tough things now, what are the fun things now. But tell us where we are. What is Luke's committee doing this week?
Well, he's got a lot of new committee members, and so they're probably doing a lot of training. And I mean, honestly, they're probably looking at all of your predictions and just kind of laughing a little bit. Just laughing a little bit.
So
I mean, that's what we would do. That's what we would do. If the three of us were doing it, that's what we would do.
Now, there's like, what kind of prediction are we talking? There's been no Pool C predictions yet. What kind of predictions are we talking about?
I mean, I saw last week all the top 25 predictions.
Okay, gotcha.
All of that. Yeah, because I just think those are just so, they kind of make me chuckle a little bit because everybody gets so into those, and
Yep.
I love it. It kind of, because it brings like D3 basketball back into the forefront of everybody's mind, and you guys are putting it back on Twitter, getting involved. And then it probably is making Luke a little bit nervous right now because, like, it's about to be go time for him. So
Right.
I would imagine that, yeah, he's probably trying to get all the new men and women ready to go. I think the biggest thing, my first year on the committee, I didn't really watch a lot of games or know a lot of things, and that was a mistake. And people have to, if you gotta at least know. You gotta know what's going on.
And Sarah, one follow-up question is that, can you tell the QCast viewers how heavily the D3hoops.com top 25 poll factors in the official criteria?
0.
0%. That's correct. That's I didn't
Come on,
know.
Sarah. Come on, Sarah.
It's been a few months since you were in. I just was so, folks, the poll, the top 25. So one of the things we could take off the mean tweets list this year is when you say, like, hey, this team is not regionally ranked, but they're ranked number 20 by D3hoops.com. It's actually not even a thing. Correct? Former commission.
It's not a criteria.
And
Yeah.
Rick, on your side, talk a little bit about, like, so this time of year, the early part of the committee work, the season has not started yet, but it is about to. What is the fun part of this part of the process? What is the challenging part of this part?
Well, the other thing that's going on right now is just making sure your racks are in place. Okay, the regional advisory committees, making sure you've got everybody, each conference represented, and there's always new folks there, so there's orienting them as well, which for new national committee members is even more challenging because they don't really know what they're doing yet, let alone getting new rack members to know what they need to be doing.
Right.
So right now it's all about learning right now, and you asked about the national, the top 25 poll. It's great. It's great for the game. It's great for attention for Division III basketball. I love that it's out there because it just generates so much talk and excitement and interest. But at the end of the day, like Sarah said, it doesn't factor into anything other than its purpose is to generate all that. Right now, it's like, when you're a veteran committee member, there's not much going on. As a matter of fact, there's really nothing going on right now.
Not for Rick. Rick would just, he was on year 22, so he just had the first meeting penciled in his calendar. He was on cruise
For the
control.
record, I only served 9 years on the committee.
Not 22, 9. It's
22.
been clarified.
Yeah.
The reason we have term limits now.
Yeah.
Ryan, from your standpoint, Ryan, as you're starting the year, and let's say you're leading a rack, and you have a bunch of green members, what are you doing this time of year to get everyone like ready for go time at this? But what are the specific things that you're doing to kind of train people up and kind of onboard them, for lack of a better term?
Well, I think you offer up your expertise. So you're immediately emailing them to saying, hey, let me know if at any point, you have any questions about some stuff, but there's going to be a national orientation call. And after that call is usually when I would, jump in, because then it's like, okay, their eggs are scrambled a little bit. Let me make sense of everything that you just heard. It was a long call. There's a lot of information. You have to log into this portal, and you have to have a password to get into this one. And, and then the NCAA is on me because they're like, they're calling me because they don't know how to get in. So I got to be the one that's like, okay, here's your login. All right. So you can check out all the information. But I think, you're doing what Sarah wasn't doing when she first got on, which is, all right, get a handle on your region, know who the players are, know who the teams are, follow it, thank goodness for D3 Hoops, you go on there, you can, and the SIDs that do quality work to send in the box scores and to get the recaps done. So you can, take a good look at, all right, what did this team do on this game here? But we are kind of constrained. A win in November is just as important as a win in
Right.
the end of February, right? And whether or not you had your star player or you didn't have your star player, or the team that you beat didn't have their star player, doesn't matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
The win is
Right.
still a quality win, and the loss still hurts as a loss. And so, that's the thing I think your rack has got to wrap their head around. They
Right.
can easily say, oh, well, they didn't have, Cruikshank for that game at Wheaton, and he ended up being the player of the year. And it's like, well, still beat Wheaton.
Right.
That's a big win.
Right. And
Yeah, I think that's the difference in what we do is, for some teams, the non-conference schedule is the most important part of their season.
right.
Because it's the only way they're going to get, a chance at the end.
If they don't
Because
get their pool A,
maybe-
right? If they need
Yeah,
a pool
because
C.
maybe their conference, has a really weak SOS, or,
I think a great point. I jump in here, Bob. You probably remember this just because you kind of follow a little bit closer inside the Midwest. But a couple of years ago, we had an interesting team in Benedictine who went out
Yes.
and beat some really good teams. Right? They beat North Central. They beat.
Yep.
Oh gosh, I can't remember now. I think they beat somebody in the WIAC, and and then they kind of were faltering down the stretch in what wasn't a very strong league from an SOS standpoint, and yet
Right.
those wins were still there. Those regionally ranked wins were still carrying a lot of weight towards the end of the year. So
Yep.
you're going to have situations like that throughout the year.
And scheduling wise, I guess I'll start this question with Sarah, and then we'll kind of talk a little about is I feel like, due to all the transparency from the committee for years now, that it's leading to way better, tougher scheduling. I'm just the D3 Datacast had a show yesterday that came out that people should check out. They did the top 50 games in November. Now that's just a subjective thing, but go check it out. There are unbelievable matchups. Like Christopher Newport has like 4 or 5 crazy games in November. You have this new UAA, what is it? UAA Centennial thing, I want to say, where like Swarthmore and Hopkins are playing NYU and WashU or something like that. There's a million of these things happening all over the country. You've got Texas teams going to California. Do you, Sarah, does that help? It's got to. Does
Yeah.
it help when you have all of these great games to start to gauge?
Yeah, and I think that started. Well, I can take a little bit of. I remember my first year, I got a ton of heat because there was I was like, what did I get myself into? Because I'd been on other national committees, and there was a team in my region who had presumed that they were like the last team or the first team not selected, right? So like the 65th team, right? They had presumed that on their own. And I just got like heat for it. And I was like, what are we doing? And then everything shut down for COVID. And for weeks I was getting calls from this school and their AD and the coach and the president. Because no one else had anything to do because of COVID. And I remember I went through everything with them, and next thing you know, like their next season, they're scheduling, I was like, well, you're probably gonna have to fundraise, because like that's what we do. We have to fundraise to
Sure.
go play these games. We have to do this or we have to do that. And I think the more that we all started talking about it, and and we're more transparent about it and getting on board with the NABC and talking through there, because it was very evident too, like a lot of coaches didn't really know like what the criteria was, and we had to kind of start pushing that out and do a lot of education on it. And I felt like until it really affected you, like people
Right.
didn't really know or care. And so I think, that was Mike Shower. He was really big on
Yeah.
being transparent and educating people. And I think we saw over the past 3 years, just a lot of people just getting out and playing, and it's made a really big difference.
And Ryan, when you have
Very
games
big
like just to, I don't know, pick one from the seat, like North Park is playing Wabash. I think North Park's playing Oshkosh. Those games, from a standpoint of like just the rack itself and starting to evaluate, and then the national picture, you agree with Sarah that like encouraging coaches to seek out those games, and what's the value to a committee member of those kind of games?
Yeah, so I mean, absolutely. You know, it was interesting. So obviously I left my previous school to be an athletic director. Well, I was doing the scheduling, and my challenge, because I knew, you know, what was out there on being on the committee, was our schedule is loaded. And so you know, the coach that's there now, Coach Finko, is not really thanking me all that much because he's got you know, a murderer's row of games because I've loaded it up. And I encouraged, you know, a lot of teams from the conferences that want to cry that they don't get enough notoriety. They need to stop playing teams that aren't up there, right? I think for a long time, I think coaches are always chasing wins, so they're not taking the calls from Ron Rose at Wesleyan, and they're not taking the calls from the Plattevilles and the Oshkoshes. You know what? They need to. They need to start taking those games. But the problem is now, all those schools were trying to find games,
Right.
and so they were calling those other conferences, and now they're not. Now they're calling the tops of the other leagues and saying, you know, we should play this game because it's really, there's really no, you know, it's a win-win, right? Even if
Right.
you lose the game, it's not really going to hurt you that much at the end of the day. You know, you
Right.
still got to win games. That's always a big charge with the committee. You know, wins are wins, but you know, it does make a lot of sense for some of these top tier programs to go out and play each other in region or even out of region across, you know, the tops of some of those conferences. I mean, you know, there's a lot of really
Absolutely.
good basketball on the East Coast, as you know. I mean, you can probably play, if you're in Pennsylvania, you can probably play three different leagues within a couple hour drive. No different than in the Midwest. You know, if
Right.
you're anywhere Chicago, you can be in Iowa, and that's a new league. You can be in Minnesota, that's a new league. You can be in Michigan, that's a new league. You can be in Wisconsin, that's a new league. I mean, you can play all these teams.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
and
that's
Rick,
good. I was gonna
uh,
say that's gonna be a challenge for the committee this year because Rick was always our balance guy. Rick was always the guy that's like when we were going region to region, like, okay, we just did this high of a SOS with this winning percentage and this, you know, like, and that was always Rick's role, at least when I was, you know, the chair. Rick was always good at that and keeping notes on all of our calls to make sure we were being consistent. So that's gonna be, they're gonna need to find a new Rick to make
and,
sure that
and
we're
Rick, to that point, Rick, when you talk about like that kind of balance and you have a game like, you know, like Christopher Newport is playing Hampton Sydney. Hampton Sydney is the favorite in the ODAC this year. And Christopher Newport obviously is the defending champs, and they bring most of the team back. When you have a game like that, what's the role that something like that plays in this process? I know it's hugely valuable to you.
Yeah, I mean, you don't really know how it's going to factor in until we're at the end of the season, because then when we're comparing teams, you know, some teams, a Christopher Newport last year was, you know, they were amongst the top. They're not, you know, we're not debating whether they're going to be in the tournament or
Right.
anything like that. But when you get into borderline situations or hosting situations, and now you start breaking down in depth, you know, when we start going game by game, well, now shoot, they just, you know, they went to Hampton Sydney and they beat them. They won at Hampton Sydney. Wow, that was a great win, you
Right.
know, or whatever. You don't know which games, you know, maybe one of those teams falls flat on their face for some reason, and now, you know, in February it's not that impressive a win.
Right.
You know, and so you don't know the magnitude until you're at the end of the season. You know, and you know, the thing I've always told coaches is if you want to learn how to do it, get on your rack. You know, find a way onto the rack, because now you're going to get an
Yeah.
education, and you're going to learn how things work, and you're going to learn what you need to do scheduling wise. You know, so anytime you know, I talk to a younger coach and they have that opportunity, I'm like, you got to jump on it, because you got to, you know, if you want to be a player, you got to learn. You can't just go
Right.
haphazard approaching the scheduling.
And it's amazing the people that have been on the rack, kind of the before and after. And Mike Showers, he told a good story on the QCast. Like he was the guy years ago that was taking pot shots at people because he didn't understand the system. And he was probably the person, you know, calling the Saras of the world and being like, what, why did I not get in or whatever? And then he ended up being the biggest champion for the way the actual system works. And I think he said Mike McGrath of Chicago is the one that got him involved and said, get on the rack and let's kind of
Yep.
see what you
Yep.
think. And so then he became the champion for all this. Just a last question. I know that all of my esteemed panel, they're all very busy. They have actual real jobs there on their campuses, and I don't want to take too much of their time. But just one more question. I'll just go in kind of order here that we've been going. Is Sarah, the biggest challenge last year? So when you think of the whole process, and then as we have other episodes this, we can dig into smaller stuff. But what was your biggest challenge last year with the whole role of for you being the chair?
I think mine was more of a personal challenge, to be honest, Bob. My my team here on campus had a great season. And so I think the biggest challenge for me is I had to sacrifice being here on campus while we hosted a conference championship. So I
Right.
missed my own team's, run at winning the conference
Sure.
championship. I wasn't here. I was actually in Indianapolis with these two guys in the room, doing selections and bracketing. And so that was, something as an administrator, I pride myself on being at all the big games, right? Or all
Sure.
the games, period. And so that was probably one of the biggest challenges for me was, missing a lot of things on campus to do this work. The time management stuff I could handle, but missing times with my students was very hard for me.
And that's the reality of this that I hope people realize is that this isn't so that this is not all these guys do is, when
Yeah.
they're on the committee, they have these huge jobs and this is just a side gig they've been asked to do. Ryan, Kane, on from your standpoint, the biggest challenge for you or the process last year as you fulfilled your role?
Well, I had a team that I was hopeful would be one of those 64. And when we were knocked out of our conference tournament, I made the drive over. We happened to be kind of further south in Illinois, so I made the drive over to Indy to be in the room. Which was a great consolation in some ways. But it was also, it's also tough to watch. I think the biggest challenge that day, though, honestly, when you think about that weekend, that's that championship weekend, that Saturday and Sunday. The biggest challenge was also is the beauty of this thing, which is the bid stealers.
Yes, last year was
We
crazy.
watched some really remarkable games on Saturday and Sunday, and we saw a few bids taken. And ultimately, I think the charge of the committee is to have a great championship and have the best teams in the tournament. And, when you have a few upsets along the way, that it's going to knock some people out. But that's
Right.
the beauty of this thing too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching Shriner, Albertus Magnus beat St. Joe.
Yep.
Cal Lutheran wasn't expected to win the SCIAC. I think there was like 10 of these things almost. Like it was unbelievable. Just I kept following my little pool C sheet, like, oh, out. Rick, how about from your standpoint, biggest challenge of the committee work last year for you?
For me, it's real simple. It was finding balance. Because I'm an athletic director, I'm a head coach, and then on doing the committee work. So, the season wraps up. My team has a very average season. We're not in contention for anything. So when the season is over, it's usually I crash. Well, nope. Let's go to Indy and let's spend a few days there and do the selections. Let's take a weekend off, then go to Swarthmore and be the site rep for 3 days, take 2 more days off, and then let's go to Fort Worth for 5 days. And so it's like, it just boom, just keeps on going, so finding being able to balance everything. So while you're doing all that traveling, still got recruiting going on, still got to run an athletic department. But that being said, wouldn't trade it for anything. It's just a phenomenal experience. And so don't interpret that as a complaint. It was just a challenge.
Well, we
just trying to manage it all.
We have signed Rick for 22-year commitment to the in the room segment. And so between that and the real, it'll be 44 years of continuous committee work. Folks, this has been awesome. And I sincerely appreciate you guys wanting to be part of this little fun thing where we can actually have fun, A, and B, kind of help educate on the realities. Maybe you guys can say these things in a way that like Luke or his committee maybe even can't. Like hoops real, #hoops real. I just want a real quick go around the room before we finish the QCast out here today is just any final thoughts, guys, for the first viewers of In the Room. Sarah, we'll start with you. What do you leave us with?
I just want to again say thanks for bringing this to life, and we look forward to all the seasons starting around the country, and watching D3 hoops come to life once again.
I appreciate it. I think Mr. Ryan Kane just lost audio. Hold on.
Yeah, I think Rick's having some issues.
Yeah, now we got some kind of echoing thing going. Rick, do you have yours okay? Okay, folks, we're back. We've had a QCast first. We've lost a guest, and this is part of the In the Room segment. Is we've lost Rick Ferry. Every organization has people that are challenged with the virtual technology. Ryan, you were saying that this kind of simulates an actual committee call. Is it Rick Ferry might have some issues like that? Is that what you're saying?
No, this is very, to borrow the term that Sara coined here, it's very hoops real. I mean, this is about what it looks like. Rick looked a little confused,
right?
And I thought, okay. And then usually something in the
really
chat.
close. Yeah.
Usually something in the chat precedes him disappearing, and then he'll, likely reappear later. So that's all good.
Yeah, we're wrapping this up, and he may pop back in the next 60 seconds before we finish. Ryan Kane, your final thoughts here on season 1 or episode 1 of In the Room.
Yeah, this gonna be great. We're gonna be in the room. We're gonna go around the room. It's gonna be fun to talk to our friends that are still on the committee, like Luke, albeit this way. And I'm excited to be on with my friends. I've got a big Super Bowl I rematch coming up between my Packers and Sarah's Kansas City Chiefs. So it's gonna be a lot of good stuff coming on here.
Yeah, and I really appreciate it. Again, sorry we did lose Rick, but we are excited to have him part of this, and he will be part of the future episodes of In the Room. So for Rick Ferry, Ryan Kane, and Sara Quatrocky, guys, really appreciate everyone tuning into this new feature of the QCast, In the Room. That was season 4, episode 10 of the QCast. Sara, Ryan, and Rick, thank you very much, guys. Have a great day.
See you soon. Thank you.
See you guys.